Wow. Hello. Good morning. Thanks for joining us for today's session. It's great to be back in Vancouver. My name is Kieran Dilley. I'm the art manager at PlayStation London Studio, and I'm also on the XDS Advisory Committee. With that in mind, when I saw the topic for today's session and it was offered for peer review, I knew it was something I really wanted to get involved in. Not just for my own interest in the topic, but actually because of who was presenting. So Sam Carlisle is obviously a seasoned professional, currently at Xbox on external partner relations. He's a fellow member of the XDS Advisory Committee, and actually what's really hard to introduce, he's a veteran of the XDS stage. So for many years, Sam has contributed very incredibly insightful sessions on a wide range of topics, some of which I believe are available on YouTube, and today's session is actually no different. So today we're going to look at game development with the movie method. I've been very lucky to see all the effort and the research that went into this. We may only graze the surface of this today, so please prepare some great questions for the Q&A at the end. So Sam, it's a pleasure to introduce you and this very anticipated session. Please give a warm welcome.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be back at XDS. And thank you to Kieran, and he's been a huge help in putting this together. So I'd like to talk today about the movie method. Movies and games. We are similar beasts, aren't we? We've got the same creative touch points, and we both love to tell a story. And for a good portion of my time in the industry, we have been talking about a desire to make games using the movie method. Take a small team and plug in all the component parts you need to realize the game. And for many years, it was pretty hypothetical because those parts just didn't exist. However, over the last 15 years, we've seen our external development community expand to a point where they're filling all of those gaps. You can build an entire game with multiple suppliers if you want. There isn't anything physically stopping you. And there has been some successes on a smaller scale, but I'm not talking about indie games. I'm not talking about small movies. I'm here for the blockbuster. At least the AA, should be the AAA. If Hollywood can churn out $100 million spectaculars with a few core creators at the helm, then why can't we? Especially given our desire to do so. So what are we missing? Because, I mean, the fact of the matter is that more often than not, a AAA's development team, their external side to that is actually bigger than their internal one. And we are actually very good at managing and communicating with our suppliers. We can be better at it, and God bless the XDS for the last decade of helping us along that path. But maybe we're still not good enough. Researching the movie method became my pet pandemic project. And quite logically, management and comms is where I began my research. Maybe there was something in the way that we onboard teams into our projects, or how we structure communication. So we wanted a way that it could be managed by fewer people. Maybe we weren't looking at it properly. Could there be a missing part of technology, which I would like, because that's a nice quick fix. That could be the missing piece. So with some degree of optimism, I started reading up on film and TV and day-to-day frontline management. There's not much on it, if I'm being honest. How were they organized? What was their communication strategy? And I spoke with people in the TV and film industry, and I also researched the history of the studio system that gave birth to the likes of Warner and Paramount and Fox. Was there something in the way they approached it and they were structured that enabled small teams to operate this way? It was through the studio system that I discovered how vital the studio lot was. In fact, for a long time, I thought the studio lot was that missing part. But eventually I realized the truth. And it is that we can't do it. We can't bend game production to fit the movie model. We're going to have to break it. So here's a question. Why do we want to do it anyway? Do we feel it'll lower costs, be more efficient, be an easier way to make games? After all, large internal development teams are expensive and hard to recruit. Keeping those numbers down by bolting down the parts that you need externally would be the smart approach. Or do we want to use the movie method so we can easily transition to a live service, freeing up our internal team to move on to the next IP? A combination of the two makes the most sense, as it would give studios the power to maintain successful games externally while keeping their precious internal resources free to work on the next big project. The movie method would solve that. So I thought the best place to start is, how do we do it now? So a lead coder, quite early on in my career, said to me, all right, Sam, I want you to imagine our final game build is like a big ball of jelly wrapped together with rubber bands and sticking plasters. And if I can set it down without it exploding, we're shipping. AAA game development is a model of overlapping interdependencies, driven by the key disciplines of design, code, and creative, each with the power to impact the other one. For example, an art asset requested by design has technical requirements that are bound by code. The engine evolves to meet these demands and push the design and creative teams, all of them demanding more of the engine, competing for those precious engine resources that we always described as an expense. Sometimes they moved at different speeds. In fact, if I'm being honest, they nearly always move at different speeds. They are very rarely in lockstep. Just tracking these dependencies, when it's that complex, is a full-time job for production, let alone planning to solve and deliver the 1,000 challenges that come with making something as complex as a game. So you're going to have to forgive me for being deliberately simplistic here, and I know I am being so. So I want to imagine that production is like building a wall to your game. The bricks overlap on top of each other. They're interlinked. It means that milestones have no choice but to cut across overlapping interdependencies. It's why vertical slices are 2 parts game, 1 part smoke and mirrors, and such a massive pain to do. And it's no wonder that schedules shift. Requirements spike and dip, and each change requirement, one missed milestone, can ripple across multiple disciplines. It's so hard to finish something fully like this, even when shipped, because you're never in sync. But that cross-pollination also drives innovation. It pushes us to achieve more. AAA demands that we advance our craft. There is a power buried in that entanglement. We've reminded ourselves of the interdependent nature of game development. Now let's compare that to film production. One of the first things I discovered was that movie making is very linear, and it has hardly changed at all in 100 years. In games, we have our 5 disciplines. Film has a similar set. However, their focus isn't on disciplines as a team. It's on the individuals to drive the vision of the project. So typically, these individuals are the director, the scriptwriter, cinematographer, some of the key actors, and the producers. Then come the teams that build the film. The second unit, VFX, sets, camera crews, casting, lighting, stunts, grip, colorization, and a bunch more. And what they do is they draw a literal line between these two. The people who will be there from the inception all the way to the last cut, or have a strong creative say, such as the actors, are labeled as above the line. Below the line teams are this list here, including the supporting actors and the crew. They form below the line, they do their role, and they disband. And there is so much here that's like game development. Bar some traditional milestones, they are very recognizable and could be tweaked to fit the game dev model. The difference is in how they work. While in still an incredibly creative stage, the deliverables in pre-production are primarily designed to de-risk the shoot. For example, the script is locked, the storyboards are locked, the locations, the permits, the licenses, the casting, the hiring, the schedules, and the budgets are all in place and done. by the end of pre-production, and I do mean done. So if we looked at the way that the line for the milestones cut across, here we can see the gap between the two is an actual gap. There isn't anything overcrossing it. Then we move on to production, the shoot. This is where the magic happens. So this is the actual filming. And finally, post-production. Scene editing, sound edits, colorizations, and everything you need to eventually ship or release your film. So we can see the shoot is where a vast amount of the challenge and the risk really lies. And again, there is so much we're familiar with. Scripts, budgets, hiring schedules, audio, VFX, etc. They're all the same common ground. So let's apply our brick analogy to it. And the difference is clear. Without the interdependency, the wall is not constructed by overlaying. It's constructed by stacking. Over 40 years ago, Eileen Morley and Andrew Silver wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review, and they described film production as a closed, temporary system. And what they mean by this is that each phase is limited in duration. People come together, they create their deliverable, and they disband. And that description, for me, changed everything. If we apply that lens to game development, whoops, let me go back one, then we see it operates as we operate as an open, persistent system. A studio of people come together and they stay together for the duration. The artists who built the prototype and benchmarks for a vertical slice in pre-production are there fixing bugs in post-production, as are the coders and the designers and so on, and everybody who contributes to the game. And sure, team sizes may fluctuate, especially with external suppliers, and many integrated suppliers who were there in the early days will be there in the final ones too. And that's how we like it. How many talks from devs and suppliers have we heard at XDS advocating the huge benefits of early integrated partnerships so that they can extend that contribution all the way down the production chain? And they are right to do so. And it's why we fail in our attempts at the movie model. So on that, I'd like to turn to risk. The film industry has evolved creative risk management into an art. So this is the typical production timeline for a blockbuster, kind of averaged out. Each box represents a month. And it's a stark representation of just how much risk is focused on that small window of production. Pre-production is twice as long as production. Post-production is 7 times longer. And we saw in pre-production it's all about de-risking the shoot. But it doesn't end there. Steps to de-risk are taken during and after the shoot as well. And so how do you de-risk during a shoot? Well, 1, you shoot more footage than you need. And 2, you employ the studio lot. So as I mentioned, I'm fascinated by the studio lot, especially viewing it as a method to stabilizing and de-risking production. The lot provides a location where much of the filming can take place. However, they house many of the below-the-line production facilities as well, such as grip and lighting and set building, even special effects and sound and Foley and the like. They minimize risk, logistics, and costs associated by filming on a location. Bear in mind, these studio lot crews are employed across shoots. They're continuously improving by learning from the vast variety of challenges lots of different types of movies and film present them. That expertise is shared, and it's refined, and it's leveraged for the benefit of others, for the next shoot. And does that sound familiar to any of you external dev suppliers? The studio lot is so integral to movie making that they've become synonymous with the brands, Universal Studios, Paramount, and the Water Tower at Warner Brothers. It's an application of process improvement from an industry to the creative process. So, and I know this is going to be an ugly word in our creative world, but that is a manufacturing approach to art. And there's a reason. that they call dream factories. So, de-risking, quick summary. They lock scripts, storyboards, secure bankable actors, hire all their teams, lock the schedule, the studio lots, shoot additional footage, previs of VFX, and they employ closed temporary systems. Now, forgive my acting, because I didn't run the risk of securing the audio. Neo, what are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets? No, Neo. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to. Once you've managed risk management to this level, you can do something very surprising. You can take massive, outrageous risks with colossal sums of money. So, in 1988, a fledgling director called Christopher Nolan made a short indie film for $6,000 called The Following. Although well received, he really broke onto the scene in 2000 with Memento for $9 million. And that's an astonishing 1,500 times bigger budget than his first film. But next, 40 million Prestige. And then on to The Dark Knight at 185 million. That's two four-fold budget jumps in less than 7 years from Memento, which is impressive. But then Chloe Zhao went from 5 million on Nomadland to 200 million on Eternals in a year. And I see this pattern of risk at this level recurring again and again and again in the movie industry. So how is it possible? I want to go back to The Matrix. It shares two major risks that Chloe Zhao's Eternals did. One, a huge difference in budget, and a huge difference in genre. Bound was a sweaty noir, The Matrix a sci-fi epic. There's not a lot of common ground there. So how do you de-risk something like that? Well, I found the answer by delving into the production credits. So the cinematographer they brought over from Bound, so nothing surprising there. The first executive producers previously worked on Analyze This and Practical Magic, so not much there either. But then a name jumped out, and it got interesting. Joel Silver. For those of you, especially maybe of my age, this guy's a legend. Die Hard, Predator, Lethal Weapon. He is the big blockbuster action sequence master. So he was involved in Matrix. Next up, Barry M. Osborne, producer on Face Off, a film peppered with close quarter, slow motion, bullet dodging gunplay. And then the last one here, Andrew Mason, Dark City. And this is perhaps the most interesting. If you've not seen it, Dark City is a sci-fi noir about a man who is told to flee from a mysterious group of strangers who then discover he has special powers and the world he lives in is not quite how it seems. That sound a little familiar? We've seen how film de-risks for the shoot by leveraging the experience and facility of studio lots. So everything is in place for the actors to do their best work. The same philosophy with directors and writers. If the script and directorial talent is there, then they go to work filling in the experience gaps. This lowers the risk to the point where they're confident enough to give the green light for an indie director duo to direct a film in a genre they have zero experience in, costing 10 times the budget. So, what is a movie method? Simply, risk management coupled with closed temporary systems. When I hear examples of studios saying, well, we're employing the movie model, it's nearly always because they're leveraging a large volume of integrated XDev. And on the face of it, integrated co-development is the obvious route to the movie model. We have our points of contact for each discipline, driving larger teams. Yet so far, I don't see any genuinely small teams, because we're talking 10 people or less. Perhaps it's more about the handover to the game as a service that could give us that small internal team ratio that defines the movie model. However, I don't know that that's all that successful either. And it's certainly not a straightforward or short process. So to be honest, this is not a representation of actual data. This is what I've discovered. This is what I've seen. So when we ramp up with serious numbers of external support, even to the point where the suppliers outweigh the development team, what happens when we come to that handover stage? The internal teams don't drop down to single figures. There is still a decent-sized team overseeing it. And there are a couple of reasons why not. Firstly, it's not single points of contact. It's multiple. Lots of people managing reviews, schedules, quality delivery of external partners. Multiple people working alongside. And when you look at all these areas that they must cover, it's not surprising that there's so many people involved. And that's made harder by the second reason. Our friend, the interdependent production model. It's not easy to untangle an internal team when they are still overlapping and impacting each other. So much so that the tendency is to actually hire and backfill a reduced internal team rather than complete the handover to an external partner. We just never stop. So, remember when I said we needed to break it? Well, this is where we grab our hammer. Let's lay down the temporary closed system. We know the three basic stages aren't that different, so no real problem here. And this is a hypothetical case study. So, we now have our stacked bricks instead of our layered bricks and our gaps between milestones. So what do we have? In the stages of phase development, we have pre-production, and we have phase one. I'm going to rattle off some parts of stage one, and forgive me for just going through, because I couldn't find a way to fit them all on this slide. So, phase one, the foundational stage. Here we have the game type or combination of types that are going to make the game mechanics. We have the monetization models and those mechanisms locked. We have the narrative and tone set, the art styles in there, the animation style, the audio themes. And casting. And by casting, I mean addressing any of the missing competencies or gaps in the core team, just like we do in film. And a previs of what the final game would look like in motion, but nothing playable. Phase two, ugly fun, and I love the term ugly fun. One level demonstrating all the game mechanisms, but working in proto-art. So a proto-art that just is a basic art style with color and textures that signify gameplay mechanics. This level is not designed to be in the final game, and it's not narrative dependent. We review, playtest, reevaluate any gameplay or animation feedback, and refine, review, and repeat until the mechanics are fun and are locked, along with narrative art. And the first script should be complete by this point. The layout and all level designs and locations based on the narrative structure are there. Basic animation pass on the core gameplay relevant motion, and art and animation Bible, first draft done. The game build design tools are identified. And then thirdly, keystones. All levels, themes, locations, goals, and systems and pathways are complete to a finalized state. UX systems and templates. Accessibility challenges and solutions are identified at this stage. Level build and gameplay tools are developed. One key and one NPC character benchmark asset complete, and that includes facial rigging and animation. Environment style beautiful corner done, and production tools established. External partners required for phase one are all established. So we're talking about here, when we talk about phase one of production, we're talking about these kind of suppliers will be the AI and the gameplay mechanics and tools and back-end and optimization suppliers. So in summary, we have a playable level and a creative benchmark before we move on to production. So the first phase of production is just entirely design focused. All the gray levels are boxed, prototype, art and animation complete. You can play this game, start to finish, because the script's finalized, the levels are play tested, refined and locked. The beautiful corner is created for each level. There's a first lighting pass. All gameplay and ambient audio assets are identified. Art and audio production tools identified and developed. External partner strategies and tests for phase 2 are completed. Production assets identified, production plan, delivery date set, and we QA the lot and fix. So creative, this is just the same. We are arting up a level in creative. We are getting every environment asset, every character asset, VFX, audio, in locked for every single level. And then we review and we QA. This is the game. So this is the shoot. This is where we have all that risk. So we are QAing and reviewing and locking down until we have it down to where we need it to be. So phase 7 is big design polish pass. Phase 8 is creative polish. And phase 9 is wrapping everything up, test, loc, and down to 0 bug. And then we prep for release. So a lot of similarity there, but it's very, very siloed. So let's look at the phase development here. We've got a longer pre-production time. And again here, each block is a month. And the hammer is still at work. This time, we have smashed years off the AAA development time. The fact is, you can't have a temporary model that lasts 5 or 6 years. It's not really temporary. So clearly, we're trading in scope. And if you believe that the AAA experience needs to be 10 hours plus, then this isn't AAA. As I think we're looking at 6 to 8 hours tops. And personally, for me, AAA is about the quality of the experience, but it is a completely valid protest to make. So first off, we're allowing extra time to lock in pre-production and de-risk milestones. There is overlap. We're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So during the first half of production, which is design-led, there are still creative work going on. But it's limited to the likes of beauty corners and animation. Because so little is in flux, developing and arting up levels concurrently is much easier and far more predictable. It allows us to punch above our weight in terms of content creation, especially given the time restriction. We are able to work far better concurrently. And we need to, because our scope creep is up front. Where possible, we want to indulge design. Having that, we want to do it in a way that actually de-risks post-production. In the same way that movies shoot too much film, we want to add as little as possible in the polish phase. So we want to actually give them, scope creep. Let's build the scope creep in. And to say design, you can do whatever you want, but we're going to factor it into production. And so that's phase development. It's the application of a closed temporary system and the de-risking of production. And it's a little bit brutal. But if that's brutal, then the structure of external suppliers is a much more family-friendly model. Collective development. The interesting thing about this method is that over the last 3 years or so, the fundamentals have been happening organically, especially in some of the larger external dev studios. So we have our studio, and we've dropped the large teams. We're back to 1 or 2 people heading up each development discipline. And we are now switching to the movie method. The studio is a temporary construct. We have brought together the above-the-line talent, and there's not many of them. QA's been dropped. This is a temporary studio. We're not building a developer. Next is the partner developer. This replaces multiple co-dev studios with a primary supplier capable of pulling together all the parts of the game. They make the game a reality. This is likely to be an engineering-heavy co-dev studio. And then the partner network. These are all the specialists, the ramping resources. Some of them are there because the studio wants to work with them directly. Others are there because they de-risk the partner developer. And they fill in those weaker areas. While the studio can work directly with the network, it relies on the partner developer to manage them. They are the focal point. They are the conduit for the studio. It does mean competition, collaborating with each other. We're all adults, and this is a buoyant market. I think we can do it. Bring them together, and you have the collective development model. Small top team, partner co-developer, and a network of every specialist resource you need. And this is a collective development model. So collective phased development. Let's bring everything back together. When we do, what we see is that in pre-production, the studio developing the core of the game take up the first 2 phases. Then in phase 3 of pre-production, we bring in the partner, the primary partner. So they're there at the foundations. Just as we do with any good integrated co-development model, we bring them in early. Then, in the production phase, we bring in the partner network, and we combine all 3 to form that collective development structure. And then in post, the network is ramped down during the first 2 phases, leaving only QA and localization to round out the push to release. So what does this mean for the external development community? Well, remember the studio lot? That oasis of stability? I initially thought that lot was that key, but now I feel it's more of an important enabler, one that provides a stable spine for the phased development approach to work. What we want is stability, predictability. And this leads us to 4 types of studio lot. First, the technology lot. So this is your stable, well-supported, and well-understood game engines. This is your Epics and your Unities, etc. And it also means employing the middleware audio for middleware for things like audio and security. And this also applies to publishers who have their own engines, provided you've well documented them. They still fit this model. So if you imagine the technology as the physical space of the lot, the buildings, the sound stages, then the people we have can be formed what I call a publisher lot. So a publisher lot, these are the publishers, the large publishers who already have a network of co-development studios inside them, because you have a ready-made partner developer network with the added bonus of secure and quick ramp-ups, and you're less affected by the shifting XDev landscape. And then we have the supplier lot. So a supplier lot is a supplier with a large enough base of sister studios that they can offer most of the services required, with the ability to add in suppliers for areas where the studio really wants to work with them or they're not so strong at. And then finally, the collaborative lot. This is a network of suppliers who aren't owned by the same parent company, but instead have a formal arrangement of cooperation that allows them to cover most of the services we need. So these are examples, and I've seen examples of this kind of collaborative formation starting to happen already. And with these 4 types of lot, suppliers can build a framework ready to form the foundation of a collective. These are XDev dream factories. So this is where the structure of the relationship with external partners can pay a long-term dividend. Without the overlapping dependencies of standard development, the entanglement we have with a traditional co-dev is all but gone. We can stage a clean handover. The partner developer takes the reins, inheriting the strength of the network. This is a very strong platform from which the collective can take full ownership of the IP, continuing to support it with content, to evolve and to grow the IP. And as they do so, they should still be employing the phased development model. From the developer's standpoint, they can either become consultants, but one way or another, they can steward the property, or they can take a full step back and hand it over completely. When the handover is complete, you start again. We are not rolling on. The old production is over. If it's going to be a sequel, then we start from scratch. If it's DLC or content, we start again. But we have the benefit of a reduced turnaround time. So there's the collective, now owning the full production cycle. So, when we're actually making that transition, there's a kind of already a model that helps us enable it, helps us keep that level of continuity. And it's called the showrunner. And I'm sure you've come across the term. So showrunners tend to form into two different categories. So there's a creator showrunner. They're often part of the original team. So these are writers and directors, and they focus on the creative, and they can be very hands-on with the development. Think Russell T. Davies on Doctor Who, and Joss Whedon, Buffy, and Aaron Sorkin's West Wing. These are integral people that keep that IP just how they wanted to go pitch it right. And then there's the production runner. So these aren't people who are hand-on with the writing, but they are deeply connected with the IP. Their role is as IP shepherds, making sure the right creatives are employed, and they act as a bridge between them. They focus on the realities of production while ensuring the creative teams operate in a way that is still free and contributes. Think Kevin Feige in the Marvel Universe, for example. So obviously, we're going to call them the game runner. And the game runner would do the same thing, ensuring the continuation of the IP as it transits over. And as it progresses, and as we use this model more, I can see the game runner coming from the collective and actually completing that external transition. So it's one of those things where I feel like I've talked at you for a long time. And I've talked a lot about mechanics. So what has been the point of this? Was it just a fun exercise to see what happens if we apply the movie method to games for real? Quite possibly. And to be honest, I am very happy if that's your takeaway. However, for me, what started as a pet project is now a thread I can't stop pulling on. And the more I pull it on, the more it gets revealed. I see more challenges, but I also see more opportunities. What we've covered here really is just scratching the surface. And please remember, this is not a fix or even an improved way of working. It's just a proposed alternative. It's a theory. And it's only one that can really be used if the conditions are right. Like I say, we've examined the mechanics. We spent a lot of time on it and some of the research that underpins it. But that's all. It's like we've built a new car. Now, where do we want to go in it? So let's explore what happens if we implement this method. And a word on implementation. As I said at the start, I went into this thinking the reason we were so fascinated by the movie method was because it allows us to stretch resources, to lower internal risk, and free us up to make more content. And maybe that is it. I wonder why so many studios believe they're employing the method. Simply because they're leveraging such a large volume of external resources that they feel they've reached a kind of critical mass that turns them into using the movie method by default. Yes, as we've seen, all we're actually doing is just expanding our volume of external production. And all we're actually doing is putting more of the internal challenges we have with our layered system onto a greater number of external partners. The movie method greatly lessens the burden of cross-discipline interdependency. And by doing so, it releases creators from having to consider multiple aspects to each decision they make, and it's exhausting, and it can be terrifying, because you see your effect of your decisions ripple across multiple disciplines. It frees them to focus only on the task in front of them. And that's what makes it possible for small teams to drive huge productions. And remember, it achieves this through the temporary closed system. And the key word is temporary. And while more I thought about it, what I seem to realize with the temporary closed system, what it really is it's something that begins, creates, and ends. It's a life. Each brick in production has a lifespan. Each production stage has a lifespan. The studio itself has a lifespan. And when it's done, it's done. We want to bring this method to life, then we must plan and accept its death. And what if it's a success? Then we start again on the sequel. The original production is dead. It's over. And it's not a long life. not by AAA standards. And like we said, it's not temporary if it's 5 or 6 years. So maybe just a couple of years. Remember the candle that burns twice as bright, lasts half as long, and we have burned so very, very brightly. And the next bit is going to sound horribly counterintuitive, as well as difficult in an industry that is constantly striving, constantly pushing boundaries. We have to stop. Movies innovate at a glacial pace. Technology happens around film production, while in games, it's the fundamental core to what we do. We can't use the movie method to drive technical innovation. If we do, we fail. So stop. Breathe. Take a look at what we have to work with. Art is shaped by limitation. You want to scare an artist or a writer? Put a blank sheet of paper in front of them and tell them to go create something. It's only when we start to apply limitations that we begin to shape it. Those limits can come in a million different forms. It can be a technical or a material or a character type, or the size of a stage, or even the budget. The movie method has limitations. Embrace them. Let them drive the creative. The theater is rife with limitations. The most terrifying experience I've had in the theater was The Woman in Black. And that show consisted of a blank stage, 2 actors, a box of costumes, and a bit of audio. So don't tell me you have to break through technological barriers to get me hiding behind a cushion. In games, when we polish up. We spend additional time on assets and features or effects. We increase scope. And when we run out of time or money, we stop. In film, they polish down. Polishing is a refinement, not an addition. If a scene's not contributing, it ends up on the cutting room floor. There's an expression, kill your darlings. It's a theory that you should stop. You should drop your favorite scene, because that's the one you spent too much time on. It's too bloated. It's too overindulgent. You've got to make that call, even if it's a heartbreaker. And we bloat by stealth. So how about we just build it in instead? At least then we'll know how long it'll take. Cut until it's killer and not filler. Games polishing through refinement rather than scope creep feels attractive to me. When AA and AAA pitches are considered, we don't just look at the proposal. We evaluate whether or not the studio proposing it can actually deliver. I asked Game Scouts if they ever turned down pitches they loved because they didn't think the studio could deliver the game. And the response was, all the time. When you step back, you see just how much we ask of talent. We put the onus, the risk, firmly on the shoulders of the talent. Hey, that's a great pitch. Now go build me a studio that can deliver it, and we'll talk. In movies, it's, hey, that's a great idea. Let's see how we can make it work. Those I talked to in the film and long-form industry quite often spoke about searching for the voice. And by this they mean looking for creators with a strong vision, a talent that believed and were prepared to hold true to it. Hey, you're a good director, and that's a great script. Now go build me a film production company that can deliver it. Imagine how many wonderful films would never have been made if that had been their mindset. Now imagine how many wonderful games haven't been made because it's ours. The movie method could alter that. It's not easy, and there are limits. But in return, we get to play wonderful games that would have withered away. And that could be a game changer. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, Sam. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you. Hey everyone, we're just going to move to the Q&A portion of today's session. So this is actually our microphone for this. So at the top you'll see there's this black dome and there's a little pattern. That's the microphone. If you could please speak clearly and concisely into it. And then the next individual, if you could throw it to them. So I'm going to demonstrate my superior throwing arm and pick someone. Right in the middle. Hopefully I don't fall off the stage.
Do it in stages.
No? You might need to hand it to the next person then. Thank you.
Hi everyone, you can hear me. Hi Sam.
Hiya.
Hi, I'm Ninel. You and me talked about the movie standard, the system, like maybe 3-4 years ago, and now I obviously see more and more of that in the industry. But what I'm actually experiencing the most, because my husband works in the movie industry, and when they come together and they're hired for a movie, when everybody comes the first day, they've never worked together, it's 100, 150 people on set, every single person knows their job. There is exactly one standard process. If the rigger comes, he knows where the tools, he knows where to do. If the art department, production design, every single person. When it comes to video games, I feel like every single studio wants to invent their own process when it comes to building a video game, and onboarding people takes what, 3 months, 6 months on a new production? Like, we know all of that. So I wonder, with resources like Microsoft and your guys' influence in the industry, if you guys looked into possibilities of unification production processes, because I feel that would be the biggest boost to production and the biggest money saver for the industry, because if we can leverage that, we can save so much money and time for people. Thank you.
It's a good question, and we've looked for a kind of I spoke about maybe a technological solution. We've kind of looked for a silver bullet of communication tools and the like for quite a while. And I remember when I first started at Xbox, I had big dreams of trying to do that, of unifying with external dev, the tools and the systems and the way we gave feedback and the like across the studios. And at the time, a core studio I was looking after were the European ones. And I quickly found that every single studio is so wildly different. Some use shotgun that they had just beat into a shape that was specific to them, others email and PowerPoint. And they kind of liked how they did it, and it fit the personalities of people who were giving the feedback. And unifying those, honestly, and maybe I just ducked out too soon, looked impossible. Looked really, really impossible. I think over time, we are seeing the same tools used more and more and more. So there's a kind of, it's creeping in. We're kind of, the options and how we approach this are reducing, and that's maybe healthy. There's also a level of risk. If you have tools and they decide, hey, and they use widely, those tools to say, hey, actually, this is the direction we want to go in, and this is what we want to focus on, and it's not what you're doing, then there's a danger to that. So yeah, it would really help. But I think we are very far from a place that we can do that, and it does still come with a degree of risk associated.
Any more questions? Oh, there's one behind you, actually, sorry.
Okay, here you go.
All right, so far in the presentation, you talked through a fairly sort of singular and static production process. Do you think the method you've outlined could be applicable to a project that's more procedural and perhaps less focused on static content and maybe more feature-based? Or is this the wrong model to be using for a game like this?
It's probably the wrong model. It's probably for that game. Because procedural is driven by technological innovation. And that's one of the sacrifices we have to make. So you would almost have to draw a line as to where you're going to get to with the procedural side of it. And as that and procedural, if you're talking about generating further content as well, constantly evolving content, then that actually fits in more with the interlinked model than it does the movie model. So yeah, that may be one that can't be done. I think things like multiplayer games can't be done either doing this way. I think that anything that drives that kind of has a large back-end component to it that has to adapt and evolve post-release is not going to be a good fit for this kind of game. But procedural methods in generating content during production, yes. The procedural methods that lead to that point, the technology that gets there, can't keep evolving when you hit production. That's the difference. So whatever you can do with your procedural tools at the end of pre-production is all you get. Does that make sense? Cool.
Brilliant. Oh, there's some hands over here if you
All right,
could.
get your throw. Hey.
Hi, Sam. Thanks
Hi.
for the talk. You mentioned playtesting and the user research process in the sections. Thank you for that. I wonder if you could speak to, my suspicion is there's an increased prominence of the importance of user feedback and user research in this proposed model. I wonder if you could speak to that either from your experience in games or from the movie industry.
Yeah, I think it is. I think because it's about de-risk, the user research, especially in the pre-production phase, is going to be incredibly important. And also, it can come through maybe in the early phases of production, of the level of production as well. There's an interesting, one of the problems that the movie model kind of faces, and one of the strengths of the Interlink model is, so there are three basic types of gameplay, right? So there's combat, traversal, and puzzle. And most games are a combination or one of the three. So if you're just shooting or aiming, then really it can be anything. It can be a crosshair and a block. And the fun comes from what you're shooting. So the fun comes from that monster that you're shooting, the way it explodes or whatever happens. And you don't get to know that fun until it's quite far on. So in terms of player research, it's difficult because you don't get to get that feedback on the art side of it and what that's contributing to game design. However, I also think that we underestimate just how well people can fill in the gaps. If the game mechanics, the core mechanics are fun, with player research, you should be able to nail that with prototype art. I believe you should be able to nail that. And yeah, I think that refinement stage, that getting the feedback and understanding exactly what the game is and locking it in is so important and would leverage player research heavily.
Hello, my name is Philip. I'm actually someone working in the film industry. I work for a company called DNEG, which brought you the visual effects for example, The Dark Knight. And what we are seeing in the film and visual effects industry is actually exactly the other side of the coin you mentioned. So we're starting to lean more and more on games processes. You might have heard the buzzword virtual production, where we're implementing game engines to do pre-visualizations and techniques on set to, again, de-risk. But it's more and more this games approach to filmmaking. So my question is, how do you see our two industries learning from each other?
At the moment, oddly enough, I see the virtual reality of the games industry kind of infecting the film industry on the VFX side a bit. It's kind of gone the other way because it's not real and you can change everything. People feel you can keep changing things. So where I'm saying, the great thing about movies is that we draw a line. Now movies in the VFX are kind of going, we don't have to draw that line anymore because this thing doesn't really exist. So we can change things, and then that starts to create crunch, and it starts to create a backlog, and the rest it's taking the worst parts of what we do and bringing it into the games, bringing it to the film industry, because it does something that we also suffer from. It makes decisions easier. If you can see it right there in front of you, it's easier to make that decision. But in terms of games and films, crossover, cross-pollination, absolutely, I completely believe in it. In fact, I gave a talk on it about 5 years ago here. Yeah, we will, I think the standard of what we deliver, the standard of real-time assets is going to really impact games and VFX because we'll be able to do so much, and you're not so reliant on, you don't have the other game engine demands, you don't have AI and gameplay and all the rest in there, so you can really ramp it up. I also think that it's going to help in the decision making. in terms of doing things virtually more. The previs, I think, is going to start to play a much bigger part in that. Films aren't, I hope, will never going to become too interactive, because I think it's something that should be played out in front of you, but it does give you that option. So yeah, we're going to see a lot of crossover in the types of people from the games industry who can transfer the skills to the film industry and vice versa. What I really want us to take from the film industry is their craft. The film industry understands lighting. The film industry understands compositing. It understands mood, and it understands individuality and has stylization so much better than we do. And I would love to see us learn that part, and in exchange, we'll give you our virtual experience.
Thank you.
So I think we've only time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Hey, Sam, back here.
Oh.
Same here. Same direction the last one was speaking, right behind
All
it.
right, gotcha.
So I'm wondering, with what you're proposing or what you're saying here with temporarily coming together, I think that's actually one of also the big flaws of the movie industry, and what's coming out of it is a lot of job insecurity and a lot of temporal and freelance work. Do you see that, which is still a kind of, even though you mentioned crunch, a good side of the games industry, there's a tendency to create long-time jobs. Do you see that being part of that movie model, or do you see that independent of it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a lot about the ecosystem in the games industry that just doesn't exist to support this, especially around talent. What the movie industry is so good is defining and finding that individual talent that fills those missing gaps, that fills those experience gaps, that puts together good teams that can work together, small-scale good teams that can work together. And we don't have that infrastructure. We don't have that system there. It's why we know so much about the movie industry in terms of people. We can name producers and directors from 5 years ago, and we can't name the same in the gaming industry. They're just not the equivalent, and yet we earn far more money than the film industry does. But we don't have those same kind of superstars. We don't have that same knowledge. So that system doesn't exist. But in terms of job security, it depends how you want to structure it. So if your studio is the one that is driving the vision, then all it means is it's allowing your studio to move on to the next project easier, leaving core creatives behind to do it. So there's no fluctuation in the main studio. But bringing together that temporary construct, you're not forming a new studio. That's the big thing. So a production studio that makes a film isn't the same thing as a new studio that's going to go on and on and on. You're bringing together external partners to do this. And so you're not closing the studio down, you're changing what they do. And the people aren't losing their jobs, they're moving on to the next thing. So some people might take advantage of that and say, right, I'm going to be a freelance design director, and I'll jump from project to project and studio to studio. Others, they might say, right, the designers and the directors and the writers in our studio are going to be the small core team, and then they'll move on to the next project, staying within our studio and still benefiting from that job security. It depends on how you take the model, but the temporary part of it is external, and for the most part, it is done by teams that are built to come in and out of projects.
Brilliant. Okay. On that note, I'm going to steal your line and call a wrap for lunch.
Lovely.
So thanks everyone for attending, and thank you, Sam.